Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this first of a series of screencasts for the Green Infrastructure and Sustainable Cities module for this semester. My name is Ian Mell. I'll be taking the class. I'm the module coordinator, and myself, along with colleagues from the University of Manchester, the LSE in London, and the University of West of England, will be talking to you about how green infrastructure is developed, what type of ways it can be used to influence society, the economy, and the natural environment, and how all these things may or may not interact. So what we're going to do in these first couple of slides is just outline the module, what you can expect to get from it, and then go into some of the more detailed things in a second podcast. So first things first, what is green infrastructure? What are we trying to do? And how are we trying to talk about it? Many of you may have heard the term green infrastructure. Many of you may even have been taught about green infrastructure before. But what we'll be doing in this lecture series is to think about the way in which the environment, the economy, and people all function interactively to provide benefits which are for humans, for society, but also for the long-term environmental sustainability of the environment and our urban areas. There will be a predominantly urban focus on this. However, there will be instances where we talk about rural areas and the urban fringe. And although these two pictures are both taken in the UK, the module is largely international in terms of its case study material. So there'll be information and discussions about the United States, about Canada, Brazil, parts of Europe, China, India, and of course the UK. Because one of the things that we think quite carefully about in green infrastructure is the nature of transferability, and how does the design, the function, the management of a place in say in London or in Leeds, which is these two pictures, will that work in France or will it work in China? And what we'll be thinking about is the way in which local contexts influence the way in which we develop and manage our urban spaces. And we'll be talking about this from a number of different perspectives, which we'll go on to in the next podcast. But one will be about temporality and the way in which society has changed and the way in which we look at the landscape has changed over time. Another aspect will be about functionality. So how do we look at these images and think, what do they give to us as individuals, but also what do they give to us as a society? So the picture on the right, for instance, is from the University of Leeds. It's a place to sit outdoors, it's a place for social interaction, it's a place to commune with nature, it's a place to have your lunch. It's a green space in a very grey area, so aesthetic qualities, so therefore it might have health and well-being properties as well. The picture on the left there from Russell Square in London, big Victorian public park, classic design, use of different mature trees. It's developed and changed over the seasons. So how did that affect the way in which people use it? And these notions of context, of evolution, of temporality, and the way in which we use terminology to describe what we see and what meaning that terminology has will form parts of the module itself. And just to set a few things out sort of logistically, the module is open to the majority of students in planning environment management and in SEED, and so we have students from all these programs on the left here. So and we'll be covering at least all the things on the right in the column there. And so what this module is, it is a bit of all sorts. It is not an ecology module, it is not a planning module, it is not an environmental management module, it's not an economics module, it's not a development or design module. But it takes aspects of each of these different areas and uses them to present a more nuanced and subtle understanding of where we are, what we're doing, and how we can employ green infrastructure and its principles in these locations. So it will touch on the way in which landscape ecology can help structure our understanding of networks or hierarchies. We'll talk about the way in which economics and the role of money and markets and funding can play in what we get developed and how it gets developed. We'll talk about political ecologists, so who has the rights to use the environment and how are people included or excluded. We'll talk a little bit about technology and innovation and how different terms and different forms of green infrastructure investment are working more from an engineered perspective. And what this module will do is that it will take cues from each of these different areas, these disciplines in many ways, and present a rounded view of that, which can then be taken back to each of the degree programmes on the left-hand side there. But in previous years, people have been surprised about how much planning content there is, how much landscape content there is, and that's fundamental to what this module will do, that it is rooted in landscape and urban planning. It is rooted in the way in which society interacts with the landscape and how we plan for that, how we develop policy making, and how we do decision making for the landscape. So there will be sessions that talk more about planning and planning governance and the way in which institutions and individuals and organisations interact with each other. But then that will be sort of countered with discussions of people and society and the way in which local culture influences the way in which we use these spaces. And just two examples here of that, we've got the Olympic Park in London, which we'll talk about quite frequently. It's a place that has been spent £9 billion on to get the Olympic Games going, but has been redeveloped and repurposed since, and is now a very, very strong economic driver of that part of East London. It has multiple different areas for promoting health, well-being, recreation, social interaction, ecological variables and ecological properties in terms of flood mitigation and biodiversity. And it also means that if you own a house quite near here, it's now worth a lot more than it used to be. The picture on the bottom is from the University of Washington in Seattle, and it's their cherry blossoms bloom in the late spring, which some of you who may be going on the Seattle field trip for the master's students might get to see. And this is a cultural phenomenon where people come from all over the city and all over the world in many cases to take pictures of the blossoms. And it's not quite as manic as you might see in Japan when they do the cherry blossom picture taking, but it is a cultural event, and a lot of people go there just for the scenery and the aesthetics. So the way in which we look at and perceive and value landscape, the way in which we can take those values and place an economic price on those, and the way in which that fits into a more formal planning context will form quite a lot of what we talk about. And we will use examples of this from across the world to really get to the sense of how these things interact. And some of the discussions will be quite positive. So the Olympic Park can be seen as a positive in many ways, some of which will be less so. So you might talk about the Atlantic Beltline and issues of gentrification, or the Sabarmati riverfront in Ahmedabad and the changing environmental and social context associated with redeveloping the watercourse. So all these things should hopefully have a relevance or a benefit to your programs, and they'll give you different insights into how you might take some of these ideas and apply them in your own in your other classes. In terms of how the module will be structured, the lectures and seminars, the lectures are on Thursdays at 10. It starts at 10, finishes at 1. It's a 3-hour session, but it will not necessarily be a 3-hour session. They are that long because there's a hope and an expectation, and it's down to yourselves to engage with some of these ideas and to ask questions. And the more interactive the sessions will be, the more we will actually then start to extend towards that 3-hour mark. There will be breaks every hour, and there will be in-class exercises, so it won't just be me talking. As you can see here, there's a number of different activities in the lecture series. So we've got guest speakers like Dr. Mark Usher from Geography, Dr. Meredith Whitten, who comes from the LSE, will talk about her work in London. Also, we've got current PhD and researchers at the University of Manchester, so Rochelle, Chris and Fergus, who will talk about their work. And then Dr. Helen Hoyle from the UWE will talk about biodiversity, community, and the way in which nature can be a facilitator of communal interaction with spaces. But in addition to these, we'll have a field visit to Liverpool in week 6. It's an all-day field visit where we'll talk with Juliet Staples from Liverpool City Council about the work they're doing there. So the module is quite broad-ranging. It is broken up by topics, but a lot of these will be interlinked. So there'll be a running narrative about context and temporality and functionality that runs through all these different things. And we'll have different voices through a number of different weeks. All the material will be kept online, so we'll have all the lecture captures, and we'll try and be as reactive to what you want out of the module as we go through. In addition, there are seminars in weeks 3, 4, 5 and 11, And I'm aware that for some students there will be a clash between their seminar on a Thursday afternoon, and if that's the case, then we can talk about how you might get the material and how you might engage with the seminars. These will be led by two of our PhD students, so Matt Sanderson and Michelle, and they will go through a number of mapping and characteristics sort of exercises to get you thinking about how you interpret and value and score the landscapes around us. Then they'll do some more consultative sort of activities towards the end of the semester. So these are 2 to 4 on weeks 3, 4, 5 and 11, and they're not that onerous, but they will be more hands-on. And so the module itself will run, and it will be predominantly presented by me, and we will be meeting in the Simon building, room 362, so it's one of the newly refurbed classrooms upstairs. I hope this has been an interesting opening insight into what the module might be and some of the logistics, and there'll be another screencast coming soon which will have to go through some of the more principles and the ideas that we're talking about later. So I'll see you all next week, and I hope you enjoy these videos.